On a frigid December morning in 1999, in a small Colorado town where everyone knew their neighbors and front doors were rarely locked, a young woman named Sylvia Ramirez left for work before sunrise and never came home. Her husband reported her missing that evening, his voice steady on the 911 call, almost matter-of-fact. Search teams combed the snow-dusted arroyos and pine forests for days. They found her car abandoned on a dirt road 12 miles outside town, keys in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat, no signs of struggle. But Sylvia herself had vanished into the thin mountain air as if she had never existed at all. The investigation that followed would stretch across more than 2 decades, through whispered suspicions and cold silences, through a family that fractured under the weight of terrible secrets, until finally, in the spring of 2023, an arrest would shake the foundations of a community that had spent years trying to forget. The question that haunted investigators from the very beginning was not where Sylvia had gone, but whether the person who claimed to love her most had been the one to make her disappear. Silverton sits in the southwestern corner of Colorado, elevation 7,800 feet, a former mining town nestled in a narrow valley, where the San Juan mountains rise like cathedral walls on every side. By 1999, the silver mines had long since closed, and the town survived on summer tourists who came to ride the historic narrow-gauge railroad and winter skiers heading to the resorts in the high country. The population hovered around 500 year-round residents, the kind of place where the same families had lived for generations, where the clerk at the general store knew your grocery list before you spoke, where secrets were hard to keep but easier to bury beneath a veneer of politeness and shared history. Main Street consisted of maybe 8 blocks of buildings with false fronts painted in Victorian colors, a handful of restaurants that closed by 8 p.m., one stoplight that blinked yellow after 9. Winter came early and stayed late. Snow began falling in October and didn't fully melt until May. The mountains trapped the cold air in the valley, and temperatures could drop to 20 below zero on the clearest nights, when the stars burned so bright they seemed to hum. Sylvia Ramirez had moved to Silverton 3 years earlier, in the autumn of 1996, following her husband Marcus, who had taken a job as assistant manager at one of the ski equipment rental shops. She was 26 years old, originally from Pueblo, a city girl adjusting to small-town rhythms. Those who knew her described a woman with a quick smile and dark eyes that seemed to hold some private sadness. She worked as a waitress at the Silver Creek Café, pulling double shifts most days, breakfast and lunch, her handwriting neat on the order tickets, always remembering how customers liked their coffee. She had no family in Silverton. Her mother had died when she was 19. Her father had remarried and moved to Arizona. She had one younger brother who was serving in the Navy, stationed overseas. Marcus was her whole world in that isolated mountain town, and perhaps that was part of the problem. They rented a small house on Cement Creek Road, a narrow lane that wound up the canyon past abandoned mine tailings and scattered cabins, most of them empty in winter. Their house was painted yellow with white trim, a covered porch facing south toward the mountains, a propane tank in the yard, a wood stove inside that they fed constantly to keep warm. On December 15, 1999, Sylvia woke at 4:30 in the morning, as she did every weekday. The alarm clock on the nightstand buzzed in the darkness. She silenced it quickly. Marcus was still asleep beside her, or appeared to be, his breathing deep and regular. She dressed in the bathroom, jeans and a burgundy fleece pullover, thick socks, her work apron folded in her backpack. She pulled her dark hair into a ponytail. She brushed her teeth. The house was cold despite the wood stove burning low in the living room. Her breath formed small clouds. She could hear the wind moving through the pine trees outside, a sound like rushing water. She walked through the kitchen, quietly, not turning on lights. She poured coffee from the pot Marcus had set on a timer the night before. She drank it standing at the counter, looking out the window at nothing but darkness and her own reflection in the glass. She wrote a note on the pad they kept by the telephone. Working lunch shift 2, home by 3, love you. She underlined love you twice. This detail would be remembered later, discussed, analyzed for hidden meaning that may or may not have existed. She left the house at 5:15 a.m. The thermometer on the porch read 18 degrees. Her white Honda Civic was parked in the gravel driveway, frost thick on the windshield. She started the engine, let it warm while she scraped the ice. The sound of the scraper on glass carried in the still air. Across the road, a neighbor later recalled hearing the car door slam, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel as Sylvia backed out. The drive into town took 7 minutes. Main Street was empty. The streetlights cast yellow pools on the snow. She parked behind the cafe at 5:28, exactly on time, same as always. The owner, Martha Jennings, was already inside, starting the coffee and the griddle. Sylvia came in through the back door, hung her coat on the hook, tied her apron. "Morning," Martha said. Sylvia smiled, said good morning back. Normal. Everything was normal. They worked together in comfortable silence, setting up for the breakfast rush that would begin when the mining museum opened at 7, and the few construction workers in town needed food before heading to their sites. The morning passed without incident. Sylvia served coffee and eggs and pancakes to the usual customers. She refilled the ketchup bottles during the lull at 9:30. She wiped down tables. She laughed at a joke one of the regulars made, a retired miner named Ede who always sat at the counter. At 11:15, the lunch cook arrived, and the cafe began filling again with the midday crowd. Sylvia took orders, delivered plates, made small talk about the weather, about Christmas plans, about nothing important. At 1:45 p.m., during a brief quiet moment, Martha told Sylvia she could leave early if she wanted. They could handle the rest of the afternoon. Sylvia hesitated, then nodded. She seemed tired. Martha would remember later, distracted maybe. She untied her apron, folded it carefully, left it in the back. She counted her tips, mostly singles and quarters, maybe $23. She pulled on her coat. She walked out the back door at 1:52 p.m. Martha watched through the kitchen window as Sylvia got into her white Honda and backed out of the parking space. That was the last confirmed sighting of Sylvia Ramirez alive. Marcus called 911 at 7:38 that evening. The recording would be played many times in the months to follow. His voice was calm, almost flat. "I want to report my wife missing," he said. The dispatcher asked when he had last seen her. "This morning when she left for work," he replied, "around 5:15. The dispatcher asked if he had called her workplace. "Yes," Marcus said. "They said she left around 2. She should have been home hours ago." The dispatcher asked about her car. "I don't know," Marcus said. "It's not here." She asked if they had argued recently. "No," he said, a pause. Everything was fine. The dispatcher said an officer would come to the house. Marcus thanked her and hung up. The call lasted 97 seconds. Deputy Daniel Ortega arrived at the house on Cement Creek Road at 8:05 p.m. He would later write in his report that Marcus Ramirez met him on the porch, arms crossed against the cold, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. No jacket despite the temperature having dropped to 12 degrees. The deputy asked the standard questions. Marcus answered each one with minimal elaboration. Sylvia was 26. She had worked at Silver Creek Café. She drove a white 1995 Honda Civic. No, they had not argued. No, she had no history of disappearing. No, she had not seemed upset or depressed. Yes, she had left a note that morning saying she would be home by 3. The deputy asked to see the note. Marcus went inside and brought it back. The deputy examined it under his flashlight. "Love you" underlined twice. He asked if he could keep it. Marcus shrugged, said sure. The deputy asked permission to look around. Marcus opened the door wider, gestured him inside. The house was neat, almost obsessively so. Dishes washed and stacked in the drainer. Living room tidy, wood stove burning. The deputy walked through each room. He opened closets, he checked the bathroom. He noticed nothing obviously wrong, but something felt off in a way he could not articulate. Marcus followed him through the house, watching but not hovering, his expression neutral. The deputy asked if any of Sylvia's belongings were missing: clothes, luggage, toiletries. Marcus said no, everything seemed to be there. The deputy asked about friends Sylvia might have visited. Marcus said she did not have close friends in town, just acquaintances from work. The deputy asked about family. Marcus said her father lived in Arizona, her brother was in the Navy. The deputy took down the information. He asked if Marcus had tried calling them. Marcus said no, he had not wanted to worry them until he knew something. The deputy nodded, wrote this down. He asked Marcus where he had been that afternoon. Marcus said he had left work at 4:30, stopped at the grocery store, arrived home around 5. The deputy asked if anyone could verify this. Marcus said the clerk at the store might remember him. The deputy asked what he had bought. Marcus listed items: milk, bread, lunch meat, coffee. The deputy wrote this down too. By midnight, search and rescue teams were assembling in the parking lot of the community center. The San Juan County Sheriff coordinated with volunteers from 3 neighboring counties. They divided into grids, assigned sectors. Some would search the road between town and the Ramirez house. Others would canvass the side roads and Forest Service routes. Others would check the river, though it was mostly frozen over. The temperature had fallen to 8 degrees. The wind had picked up. Fresh snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, the flakes small and hard like grains of rice. They searched through the night with flashlights and spotlights mounted on trucks. They called Sylvia's name into the wind. They found nothing. At dawn, the search expanded. Tracking dogs were brought in, given Sylvia's scent from clothing Marcus provided. The dogs worked the road from town, lost the scent near mile marker 7, circled back, lost it again. Helicopters from the state patrol flew grid patterns over the surrounding wilderness. The snow continued falling. Visibility dropped to less than half a mile. By noon on December 16th, more than 100 volunteers had joined the search. They walked shoulder to shoulder through the forest. They checked every abandoned mine entrance, every collapsed structure, every snowdrift deep enough to hide a body. At 2:15 p.m. on December 16th, a volunteer found Sylvia's car. It was parked on County Road 580, a dirt Forest Service road that branched off the main highway about 12 miles south of Silverton. The road was rarely used in winter, unplowed, barely passable, even with 4-wheel drive. The white Honda sat in a small pull-off area, angled slightly as if the driver had stopped suddenly. Snow had accumulated on the hood and roof, perhaps 3 or 4 inches, suggesting the car had been there since the previous afternoon at least. The driver's side door was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition, turned to the off position. Sylvia's purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside, $42 in cash, credit cards, driver's license, her photo smiling from behind the plastic window. Her cell phone was in the cup holder. No signs of struggle. No blood. No broken glass. The windows were intact. The interior was neat. Her backpack was in the back seat, her work apron still inside, folded. The gas tank was 3/4 full. The odometer read 73,412 miles. Deputies photographed everything, dusted for prints, found only Sylvia's and what they assumed were Marcus's. They towed the car to the impound lot in Durango for further examination. They expanded the search area around County Road 580, but the terrain was rough, steep slopes covered in oak brush and deadfall timber, countless ravines and gullies where a body could lie hidden for years. They found no footprints, no torn clothing, no blood, nothing to indicate which direction she might have gone or whether she had left the car voluntarily. The question investigators could not answer was simple. Why would Sylvia drive 12 miles in the wrong direction, away from home, onto a remote forest road, and then vanish? Marcus could offer no explanation. He said he did not know why she would go there. He said he had never been to that location with her. He said she had never mentioned it. Deputies interviewed everyone who had seen Sylvia that day. Martha Jennings described her as perhaps more quiet than usual, but not alarmingly so. The lunch cook said he had barely spoken to her. She had been busy. Ede, the retired miner at the counter, said she had seemed perfectly normal, had smiled at his joke about the weather. No one reported seeing her leave the cafe parking lot. No one remembered seeing a white Honda on County Road 580. The route she would have taken to get there required her to drive south on Highway 550, past the turnoff to Cement Creek Road where she lived, past several other roads that would have taken her home. She would have had to intentionally choose to keep driving, to turn onto the Forest Service Road, to park, and then disappear. Those who knew him said Marcus showed little emotion during those first days. He answered questions politely. He helped organize the search efforts. He spoke to the local newspaper reporter who covered the story, his quotes brief and measured. "I just want her found," he said. "I want her to come home." He did not cry, at least not in public. Some found this stoic, others found it strange. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about his demeanor, about small inconsistencies in his timeline, about how quickly he had seemed to accept that she was simply gone. On December 18th, 3 days after Sylvia's disappearance, Marcus agreed to take a polygraph examination. The results were inconclusive, the examiner noting that Marcus showed signs of stress but nothing definitively indicating deception. The problem with polygraphs, as any investigator knows, is that they measure anxiety, not truth, and a man whose wife has vanished might have many reasons to be anxious. Still, the inconclusive result added to the unease surrounding Marcus. Investigators reconstructed his movements on December 15th with meticulous detail. He had clocked out of work at 4:27 p.m. The grocery store receipt was time-stamped at 4:41 p.m., matching his statement. The clerk remembered him, said he had seemed normal, maybe in a hurry but not agitated. The drive from the store to his house took approximately 18 minutes. This meant Marcus arrived home around 5 p.m., give or take a few minutes. Sylvia had left the cafe at 1:52 p.m. Her car was found 12 miles south of town on a road that would take perhaps 20 minutes to reach and then park. This meant she could have been at that location by 2:15 or 2:30 at the latest. The snow on her car suggested it had been parked there overnight, accumulating precipitation from the storm that began around midnight. This created a window of approximately 3 to 4 hours, from when Sylvia left work to when Marcus arrived home, during which her movements were unknown. Investigators drove the route multiple times, checking for any businesses with security cameras, finding none. They interviewed residents along Highway 550, asking if anyone had seen a white Honda that afternoon. No one had, or if they had, they did not remember. The weeks passed. Christmas came and went, an obscenity of normalcy while Sylvia remained missing. The search effort scaled back as winter deepened and hope faded. Marcus returned to work in early January. He kept the house exactly as it had been, Sylvia's clothes still in the closet, her shampoo still in the shower, her coffee mug still hanging on the hook above the sink. Friends tried to visit to offer support, but he politely declined most invitations. He preferred to be alone, he said. He needed time. The community watched him with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. Some believed he was a grieving husband, coping the only way he knew how. Others believed he knew exactly what had happened to Sylvia and was waiting to see if anyone else would figure it out. The investigation remained active, but produced no new leads. Detectives looked into Sylvia's background, searching for anything that might explain her disappearance. They found nothing troubling, no secret debts, no affairs, no enemies. She had been, by all accounts, an ordinary woman living an ordinary life, until the moment she was not. In March of 2000, the Sheriff's Department released a public statement acknowledging that Sylvia Ramirez was now considered a victim of suspected foul play. They did not name any suspects, but everyone in Silverton understood the implication. Marcus hired a lawyer, an attorney from Durango who specialized in criminal defense. The lawyer advised him to stop speaking to investigators without counsel present. Marcus complied. The flow of information slowed to a trickle. The case file grew thick with reports that led nowhere, witness statements that contradicted each other in minor details, theories that could not be proven. Deputy Ortega, who had been the first to respond that December night, drove out to County Road 580 regularly during the spring thaw, walking the area as the snow melted, hoping it would reveal something, anything. He found nothing but broken beer bottles and cigarette butts from summer campers, the detritus of people who had passed through, without leaving anything meaningful behind. By summer, the media attention faded. By fall, even the most dedicated volunteers had moved on to other concerns. Sylvia Ramirez became another name in the cold case files, another unsolved disappearance in a state where the wilderness was vast and unforgiving, where people sometimes vanished and were never found. Marcus remained in Silverton for another 2 years. He worked. He kept to himself. He attended a support group for families of missing persons that met monthly in Durango, a 45-minute drive through the mountains. Other members later described him as quiet, listening more than speaking, occasionally sharing details about Sylvia in a voice devoid of inflection, as if describing someone he had known long ago rather than the woman he had shared a bed with, whose absence had left his life in ruins, or so he claimed. In June of 2002, Marcus sold the house on Cement Creek Road and moved to Grand Junction, a larger city on the western slope, where he could disappear into relative anonymity. He took a job at a sporting goods store. He rented an apartment in a complex full of transient workers. He told no one about his past. He started dating again, casually, women he met at bars or through friends. He did not mention Sylvia unless directly asked, and then he would say only that his wife had disappeared years ago in circumstances that were never resolved, his tone suggesting the topic was closed. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that cold thread of suspicion weaving through your thoughts late at night, who have wondered if the person sleeping beside you is capable of things you cannot imagine, the story of what happened next will be familiar. In March of 2005, Marcus married again. Her name was Jenna Caldwell, a dental hygienist from Grand Junction, 31 years old, optimistic and trusting. They met at a friend's barbecue. She knew about Sylvia, or thought she did, the broad outline at least. Missing wife, unsolved case, tragic but not his fault. Marcus had learned how to tell the story in a way that invited sympathy rather than scrutiny. They married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just immediate family, no big celebration. They bought a house in a subdivision on the eastern edge of the city, a 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage and a backyard that needed work. For a while they seemed happy. Jenna talked about having children. Marcus was non-committal but not opposed. They fell into routines. They argued occasionally about small things, money, housework, his tendency to withdraw into silence for days at a time. But nothing seemed seriously wrong, not at first. Their daughter, Emily, was born in November of 2006, a healthy girl with Marcus's dark eyes and Jenna's smile. The birth was complicated, an emergency cesarean after 20 hours of labor, and Jenna spent a week recovering in the hospital. Marcus visited every day, bringing flowers, sitting beside her bed, holding Emily when the nurses brought her in. Jenna's mother, who had come to help after the birth, later recalled thinking that Marcus seemed like a devoted father, perhaps a bit emotionally distant but attentive in practical ways, changing diapers, preparing bottles, walking the floor at 3 a.m. when Emily would not sleep. They settled into the exhausting rhythm of new parents. Months passed. Emily grew. She learned to roll over, to sit up, to crawl. Jenna went back to work part-time when Emily was 6 months old. They hired a babysitter, an older woman from their neighborhood who had raised 4 children of her own. Life continued. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Jenna began noticing things she could not quite articulate, small behaviors that felt wrong. Marcus would sometimes sit in the dark living room after Emily was asleep, staring at nothing, not watching television or reading, just sitting in silence. When Jenna asked what he was thinking about, he would say nothing in a tone that discouraged further questions. He had nightmares, violent thrashing dreams that left him drenched in sweat, but he refused to discuss them. He kept the garage meticulously organized, tools hung on pegboards, every item in its designated place, and became irritated if Jenna moved anything. He was obsessive about locking doors and windows, checking them multiple times before bed. He insisted on knowing Jenna's schedule at all times, where she was going, when she would return, who she would see. He framed it as concern, but it felt like surveillance. Once, when Jenna was late coming home from work because of traffic, Marcus called her cell phone 17 times in 30 minutes. When she finally answered, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "I thought something happened to you," he said, and she could hear beneath the words something that sounded less like fear and more like fury. Emily began having nightmares when she was 3 years old, waking up screaming about a woman in white who stood at the end of her bed. The pediatrician said this was normal. Children that age had vivid imaginations. It would pass. But the nightmares persisted. Emily drew pictures at preschool, crayon figures of people with exaggerated features. One picture in particular that caught her teacher's attention. A stick-figure woman lying on the ground, red scribbles surrounding her. Another figure standing nearby. The teacher showed it to Jenna, asked gently if everything was okay at home. Jenna said yes, of course, just an active imagination. But she kept the drawing, folded it, hid it in a box in the back of her closet, not sure why she felt the need to preserve this evidence of something she did not want to name. The marriage deteriorated slowly, like rust spreading across metal, visible only when you looked closely. They stopped having sex. They stopped having conversations that mattered. Marcus worked longer hours, took on extra shifts, came home late smelling of cigarette smoke, though he claimed he had quit years ago. Jenna suspected he was having an affair, looked through his phone one night while he showered, found nothing incriminating but felt guilty anyway, as if the act of searching was worse than whatever she might find. They began sleeping in separate rooms, Jenna claiming she needed to be closer to Emily's room in case she woke up, both of them knowing this was only partly true. They discussed divorce in careful, tentative conversations that never reached resolution, both afraid of what splitting up might mean, what complications might arise, what questions might be asked. In August of 2009, when Emily was almost 3, Jenna's mother came to visit for a week. She noticed the tension immediately, the way Marcus and Jenna moved around each other like strangers, the way Emily clung to Jenna and went quiet when Marcus entered the room. One afternoon, while Marcus was at work, Jenna's mother asked directly if she was happy. Jenna started to say yes, then stopped, and suddenly she was crying, all the accumulated stress and fear pouring out. She told her mother about the nightmares, Marcus's strange behaviors, her own growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. Her mother listened, held her hand across the kitchen table, and then asked the question Jenna had been avoiding. "Do you think he did something to his first wife?" Jenna did not answer immediately. The question hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Finally, Jenna whispered, "I don't know, but sometimes I'm afraid to ask." Jenna began researching Sylvia's disappearance, searching online late at night after Marcus was asleep, reading old newspaper articles, posts on true crime forums, speculation from people who had never met Marcus but had decided he was guilty based on the limited public information. She learned details Marcus had never shared, about the inconclusive polygraph, about the suspicious timeline, about the fact that he had sold their house and moved away so quickly. She looked at photos of Sylvia, a smiling dark-haired woman who looked so young, so unaware of what was coming. Jenna wondered what Sylvia had known in those final hours, whether she had suspected, whether she had felt the same growing dread that now filled Jenna's own days. She wondered if Sylvia had tried to leave, if she had packed a bag and driven 12 miles out of town before Marcus caught up with her, if the abandoned car was not a mystery, but a clear sign of someone who had almost escaped. In January of 2010, Jenna told Marcus she wanted a separation. His reaction was controlled, almost eerily calm. "If that's what you want," he said. They agreed he would move into an apartment, that they would split custody of Emily, that they would try to keep things amicable. Marcus packed his belongings over a weekend, loading his truck with boxes and furniture, his tools from the garage. Jenna watched from the kitchen window as he made trip after trip, and she felt not sadness but relief so profound it frightened her. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment near his work. They established a custody schedule. Emily would spend weekends with Marcus, weekdays with Jenna. For the first few months, the arrangement worked well enough. Marcus picked Emily up on Friday evenings, dropped her off on Sunday afternoons. Emily seemed okay, not happy exactly, but not distressed. Then one Sunday in April, Emily came home and would not speak. Jenna asked what was wrong, but Emily just shook her head, went to her room, closed the door. Jenna gave her space, made dinner, tried again at bedtime. Emily was sitting on her bed, holding a stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her face. "Sweetie, what happened?" Jenna asked. Emily looked up at her mother with eyes that seemed far too old for a child of 3.5, and she said, "Daddy told me about the lady who went away." Jenna's breath caught. She sat down on the bed, pulled Emily into her lap. "What lady, honey?" Emily's voice was small. "The lady Daddy made go away, the lady who won't come back." Jenna felt her heart hammering. She kept her voice steady. "What exactly did Daddy say?" Emily was quiet for a long time then. "He said sometimes people have to go away when they don't listen. He said the lady didn't listen." Jenna held her daughter, her mind racing. She did not know if this was a literal confession filtered through a child's understanding, or something more abstract, a warning disguised as a story. But she knew with absolute certainty that she could not let Emily go back to Marcus's apartment alone. The next morning, Jenna called her lawyer. She explained what Emily had said. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Alvarez who had handled their separation, listened carefully and then said, "This needs to be reported." Jenna hesitated. "To who?" Patricia said. "To the police. If Marcus told your daughter something about his first wife's disappearance, the cold case investigators need to know." Jenna felt a wave of fear. "What if I'm wrong? What if Emily misunderstood?" Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. "What if you're right?" On April 22, 2010, Jenna sat in an interview room at the Grand Junction Police Department with Detective Lisa Chen, a veteran investigator with the Major Crimes Unit. She repeated what Emily had told her, her voice shaking. Detective Chen took notes, asked clarifying questions, explained that they would need to interview Emily, that this would be done carefully by professionals trained in talking to children. Jenna agreed. She signed the necessary forms. She went home and tried to explain to Emily, in age-appropriate terms, that some nice people wanted to talk to her about what Daddy had said. Emily seemed frightened but nodded. The interview took place 3 days later, conducted by a forensic child psychologist in a room designed to be non-threatening, with toys and soft chairs, and a camera recording everything from behind a one-way mirror. Emily repeated the story, more haltingly this time, but the core details remained the same. Daddy said he made a lady go away. Daddy said she didn't listen. Daddy said she won't come back. Detective Chen contacted the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. The case file on Sylvia Ramirez was pulled from storage, boxes of reports and photos and evidence that had gathered dust for a decade. Deputy Ortega, now a sergeant, still working in Silverton, still remembering that cold December night, learned that there might finally be a break. He drove to Grand Junction, met with Detective Chen, reviewed Emily's interview footage. The child's words were chilling, but they were also ambiguous. A defense attorney would argue that a 3-year-old's interpretation of a conversation was unreliable, that children confabulate, that memory is malleable. They needed more. They decided to interview Marcus. On May 6, 2010, Marcus Ramirez was asked to come to the Grand Junction Police Department for a voluntary interview. He arrived with his lawyer, the same attorney who had represented him years before. They sat across from Detective Chen and Sergeant Ortega in a small room, the conversation recorded. Detective Chen began gently, asking Marcus about his current life, his relationship with Emily, his feelings about the separation from Jenna. Marcus answered in his usual measured tone. Then Detective Chen shifted. "We've received information suggesting you may have knowledge about what happened to Sylvia." Marcus's expression did not change. "I don't know what happened to her. I've said that from the beginning." Detective Chen described Emily's statement, carefully watching Marcus's reaction. For the first time, something flickered across his face, a tightening around his eyes, a tension in his jaw. His lawyer interjected, said his client had nothing more to say, that this interview was over. They stood to leave. Sergeant Ortega, who had been silent until that moment, said, "We're going to find out what you did, Marcus. It might take another 10 years, but we'll find out." Marcus looked at him, and for just a moment the mask slipped, and what showed beneath was cold and empty. Then he turned and walked out. The investigation intensified. Detectives re-interviewed everyone who had been involved in the original case. They looked for evidence that might have been overlooked, for witnesses who might remember something new. They searched Marcus's apartment with a warrant, looking for anything that might connect him to Sylvia's disappearance, finding nothing obvious but seizing his computer, his phone records, his financial documents. They examined his work schedules from December 1999, cross-referencing with the timeline, looking for any gap that might have allowed him to intercept Sylvia. And then they got a break. A former coworker of Marcus's from the ski rental shop, a man named Trevor Hoskins who had moved to Alaska years ago, read about the reopened investigation online. He contacted the sheriff's office. He said there was something he had never mentioned before, something he had not thought was important at the time, but that had bothered him ever since. On December 15, 1999, Marcus had asked to leave work 2 hours early, claiming he had a doctor's appointment. Trevor had covered for him, thinking nothing of it. But Trevor had seen Marcus drive past the shop later that afternoon, around 2:30 or 3, heading south on Highway 550, the opposite direction from his house. Trevor had assumed Marcus had changed his mind about going home, maybe was running errands. But now, knowing that Sylvia's car was found 12 miles south of town, the detail seemed significant. This changed everything. If Marcus had left work early, around 2:30, he would have had time to intercept Sylvia, perhaps by calling her and asking her to meet him somewhere, perhaps by following her. The story he had told about leaving work at his normal time, stopping at the grocery store, going home, suddenly had a hole in it. Detectives obtained the work schedules from the ski shop, records that had been stored in a back office for years, never discarded. The timesheet showed Marcus had clocked out at 2:33 p.m. on December 15th, not at 4:27 as he had claimed. They checked the grocery store receipt again. It was timestamped 4:41 p.m., but it did not prove Marcus had gone directly home afterward. He could have driven out County Road 580, done whatever he had done to Sylvia, come back, stopped at the store to establish an alibi, then gone home. The timeline fit if you assumed guilt. It fell apart if you assumed innocence. In October of 2010, detectives made another discovery. They obtained phone records from Marcus and Sylvia's home line in December 1999, records that had not been thoroughly examined during the initial investigation. On December 15th at 2:09 p.m., a call was placed from their home phone to Sylvia's cell phone. The call lasted 48 seconds. This meant Marcus had called Sylvia while he should have been at work, around the time she would have been leaving the cafe. If he had left work early, driven home, called her, asked her to meet him. Everything else followed. Detectives believed they finally understood what had happened. Marcus had called Sylvia, told her some lie, convinced her to drive out to County Road 580. Maybe he said his car had broken down. Maybe he said he had a surprise for her. Maybe he simply told her to meet him and she complied because she trusted him. He had killed her there, hidden her body somewhere in the vast wilderness, then driven her car back to the pull-off to make it look like she had disappeared on her own. Then he had driven back to town, stopped at the grocery store to create a timeline, gone home, waited until a plausible hour and reported her missing. The problem was proof. They had a circumstantial case built on timeline discrepancies and the statement of a 3-year-old child. They had no body, no murder weapon, no forensic evidence. The San Juan County District Attorney reviewed the file and said it was not enough for charges. Not yet, but he authorized continued investigation.